And now our host, Stephen Lee Morris.
A long-time observer of the LA theater scene, Terry Morgan has written for Variety, for the LA Weekly, and currently writes for Stage Raw. For the past 20 years that he has been on the Los Angeles Drama Critics Circle, Terry has been president for at least half of those years, and he currently serves as president of the LADCC. Terry Morgan, welcome to Animal Farm.
Thank you for having me.
You are the president of the Los Angeles Drama Critics Circle. At a time we are speaking in February 2022, when the Omicron variant appears to be in decline nationally. We're seeing theaters beginning to reopen in numbers we haven't seen in a long time. There is the danger of another variant that hasn't been talked about much, maybe I think a dozen or maybe 24 cases in LA, and nobody knows what that poses. So I have two questions for you. First, let's talk about the Drama Critics Circle itself, what it does, how many members does it have, how does it pick its members, and what do its members do? What is its purpose?
The purpose of the Drama Critics Circle, and there is actually a line in our bylaws specifically, but I think it's to promote excellence in theater in the greater Los Angeles area. I think it's something along those lines. And that's basically
a terrible idea that is. Go on, go on.
I know.
Go on. Yeah.
Excellence. There's so much excellence out there. It's like, come on, you can't come up with something better. Yeah, but that's what they came up with 50 years ago. It's actually now, it was 50 years ago in 2019. So what are we? It's now 53 years old. The organization. We did our 50th anniversary at the Pasadena Playhouse back in 2019.
That makes the Drama Critics Circle one of the longest standing institutions in Southern California theater, doesn't it?
I would suppose so, I guess.
Among them, I mean, not these.
Off the top of my head, I can't think of another one that is currently running.
Pasadena Playhouse, you could argue. So.
Well, oh yes, in terms of theaters and things. I thought you just meant like, critical organizations or what have you. But they've been around for a long time. And one of the things that was actually really kind of a delight was when we did the 50th anniversary thing, which I produced, we actually contacted all the living members that we could, the people who originally started, and we got a hold of a lot of them, and several of them flew across the country for the show. And it was really interesting to talk to some of these people, because when they were reviewing, there was much more of the theater was much more thriving. People could actually do this for a living, like be reviewers for a living, essentially. And there were 5 or 6 daily papers at least, and they were all had theater critics who had regular.
Let's go over them. You're right. In living memory, the Daily News, the Los Angeles Times, the Los Angeles Herald Examiner, the LA Weekly, that wasn't.
Well, and there was the LA Reader too for a while.
The LA Reader, of the Village View, or became the LA View, and so on and so forth. And even New Times.
There was even in my circle in '97. When was that? No. I joined the Weekly in '97. I joined the Circle in '99. And even at that time, a lot of those people were still in the Circle. They were still working theater critics, people like Tom McCullough, Polly Warfield, people like that. And so it was really interesting to talk to a different group of people who had been through a whole different LA theater era, and they also went through a time when LA theater was not considered so legitimate. It was considered more of a showcase and so on and so forth. And it really kind of hadn't really been considered more legitimate until somewhere around the time that I joined is when I think people really started treating it maybe more seriously. And that had nothing to do with me, obviously, but I think it had taken a long time for people to treat it more seriously. And so they had been doing it for decades and having to kind of fight against the idea that, LA was not quite the equal of other theater cities and so on and so forth. So it was interesting to talk to people who had done it for a job, where nobody of my generation has been able to do it as just a full-time job. It just doesn't really exist anymore. It's always something you do, on the side with some other way to make money.
Well,
so
with a few notable exceptions. The staff writers at institutional papers. Well, we didn't mention the trade papers such as Dramalog that existed then, Backstage, and then which
Variety,
Backstage West, Variety, Hollywood Reporter, etc., etc.
Well, and a few of them still exist.
Yeah.
But anyway, getting back to your initial question, so the Circle, essentially we're an awards giving organization, and we give awards once a year, and we try to see we see everything, in terms of theater, not so much, we're pretty much focused entirely on theater. It's not involving, opera or dance or things like that, but we see things from the smallest theater to the biggest, and we try to
so who do you admit, and what are the qualifications, and how does
qualifications
that work?
I mean, the qualifications are you need to be willing to see a certain amount of shows during the course of a year. You need to be reviewing a certain amount of shows during the course of a year. And you need to be willing to participate in regular meetings with the Circle, because we end up discussing everything, every show that might be, we have a weekly list that we have just amongst ourselves. And you would know this being a member of the Circle on and off during the years. But we end up having discussions about everything, pro and con. And so then when we finally get to voting, it's always been built on a year's worth of discussions, essentially. And then we really get into it once voting comes, and have these 3-4 hour meetings where everything is hashed out. Now,
I have a question. That sounds like a very healthy and normal, what would be expected as an awards process of singling stuff out, and a lot of healthy discussion. I'm still interested in the membership and the qualifications. Has it evolved? There are individual bloggers who, in the current climate, actually are much more, I will say, important in that they have a kind of value that they didn't have in former years when there were more print journalism. Has your policy towards individual bloggers who are not part of an institution per se, has that evolved?
Oh yeah, I mean, everything has changed. I mean, when I joined the group, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but it used to be you had to see a minimum of about 100 shows a year, and people did, everybody did. And that minimum has dropped partly because there aren't that many shows anymore, and also people aren't getting paid, full-time wage to go see 3 or 4 shows every week. So the qualifications have changed as reality has changed, basically. And bloggers was a relatively recent thing, and in the Circle we've only started having them, I'd say, in the last few years. But I mean, I think that the reason that we started doing it was LA theater has become like it's a theater musical chairs, particularly in terms of critical circles. We're losing venues all the time, or venues just stopped covering it. Like I wrote for Variety for 3 years, and Variety one day, there were 3 of us covering theater, and Variety one day just said, oh, we're only going to cover shows now that have, a big star in them, and that's it. And so we only need one person, and that person doesn't even need to review more than maybe once a month. So there are papers that still go on, but they don't, they've cut back their coverage. The Times has cut back their coverage a ton. I mean, they still have, I think, 3 or 4 people, but you notice that most of the time those people, and this is back when theater was before the pandemic.
Okay, that's going to be the question.
Yeah. Might get 1 review a month, and they have their main critic who reviews all the big shows, and then they might have one of the other critics review something, but I don't know if that's going to continue or not. I'm not really sure, but I've just noticed in general, even the papers that are still with us are doing less, and a lot of papers are not with us anymore either. So as a result, we ran out of, new people to approach in terms of being, members of the Circle. And so we also started noticing that, oh, hey, blogging has become very legitimate, and you have some very good writers who have a great deal of knowledge. And so
I've noticed that.
We started, and I'm sure it's the same thing with podcasting and so on and so forth. And so we basically we're constantly having to reevaluate what works for us now. What is the best way for us to represent the LA theater community, or cover it, I should say, that we can in the moment. It's also a volunteer organization, so sometimes there may be somebody that you think is great and they just don't have the time, to do it right now or whatever. But we do our best. But yeah, we went basically a few years ago. We started making a active search for theater bloggers to find people that we thought might be, you know, good. And that actually was great. We ended up getting quite a few good people out of that. And then once you start getting into that world, they'll recommend people that you might not have noticed. And it's sort of, it all kind of, but I'd say now we have all, you know, I don't know what the percentage is off the top of my head, but I mean, I would say a decent percentage of the people now writing for the Circle are probably almost, well, everybody's online these days. But some of them, yeah, a lot of them are probably bloggers of one sort or another, or just, you know, have their own site.
What is, from what you're seeing, you're resuming, at least for a while, the presidency of your organization, which you have been, you said, for at least half, on and off for half the time you've been a member. You've been
like
you've
20 years on and off, I'd say. Yeah. I would guess. I don't know, but I mean, I think maybe 10 times, maybe not quite that much, but something like that.
So in terms of the activities of the Circle, which is intricately woven to the activities of the theater community, what are you seeing? What is the shape of the community right now as it emerges from Omicron? And we hope this time the resurgence of live performance, we hope this time it'll stick, because it's resurged before and then it's had to shut down. What's your take on that?
I mean, my take is largely wishful thinking, right? I mean, nobody knows what's going to happen next. I will say, it seems to me that there is a great deal. Let me back up for a second. Before Omicron, back in the last summer, all of a sudden, that was really the first time that you started seeing live theaters show up again, you know, and it was here and there, spotty. And I remember the first one that really sort of made a big splash was the Fountain Theater, and they built a whole outdoor theater specifically for that. And I remember going to that show, which was an octoroon, and it really was like, oh, hey, theater is back, you know, and everybody, there was that sense of it. And people were excited, you know, and they were like, we'd all been stuck in our houses for a year plus or something. And people were very happy just to see each other, you know, and hey, it's theater. And I've had that experience a couple of times where it's just like, the play itself is one thing, but it was just the happiness of being there, the sense of community was really striking. Another one that was like that was, they did a one-man show at the Echo at the Atwater Village Theater called Stand Up If You're Here Tonight. And it was this kind of oddball one-man thing where it was sort of funny, sort of serious, but in a weird way, it was kind of this, it felt like an incantation to start theater up again. There was that vibe to it, and there was a lot of audience participation, and that's how it ended up feeling to me. I really enjoyed it. I thought the writing was interesting. The performer, Jim Ortley, was great. But really how it hit me was, it's like they're casting a spell to bring theater back.
Was this done, this show at the Echo, was this done indoors?
This was done indoors, yeah.
And was the
first show that I had been to indoors.
Was the audience masked?
Oh, we were all masked, and they did the vaccination check, and this was pretty early on. This was 4 or 5 months ago. Yeah,
and the actor, it's still a small space. The actor, I take it, was not masked.
He was not masked, no, but everybody else was masked. But we're talking, what, that theater that they had it in takes, what, 30 people, maybe something like that?
Well, that's the point. That's the point.
But this is before Omicron, too. That was the big difference. Because back then, it was more, if you've been vaccinated for Delta, it seemed like that was enough protection. And then everybody was masked and showing their proof of vaccination. It felt pretty safe. And as far as I know, nobody got sick from it. With Omicron, the difference is you can be vaccinated, but you can still get it. So what's important is how good is your mask, basically. I think that's what's changed. But anyway, so there were moments in the previous year where it felt like, okay, they're really making a serious effort to come back, and they were important. But the difference now is, in the last week or two, normally I would receive, in the last couple of years, I might receive one invitation for a show, generally streaming, obviously, but not for the last 6 months. But one invitation for a show, maybe a week, you know, which is really unusual if you're doing this for a long time. And in the last 2 weeks, I've received like 15. You know, and it's a combination of small theaters and huge theaters. And so everybody seemed, I mean, particularly the week of the 13th, everybody's opening at once, which is one of my pet peeves with LA theater. I wish they talk to each other, right? Particularly the big theaters, they always open like 2 huge shows like on the same night.
Yeah.
I don't understand why they can't figure that out. And apparently they still haven't figured that out, because here we are. But so I do feel like that there is a sense of maybe things are about to get better. You know, I mean, the declining Omicron is one thing. Obviously, we don't know what's going to happen with new, you know, possible variants and so on and so forth. But I think that they're trying to will it into existence. Right.
Yeah.
The theater is back. We're just going to do it and see what happens, you know. And for me, I've been very cautious as to, you know, well, not Omicron, but just the COVID in general, right? And I had been avoiding going to any big shows because there's been a couple. You know, Hamilton came back, and there was a couple of shows at the Amundsen, A Christmas Carol, where they had to cancel it because, you know, it seemed like half the cast got sick. Mm-hmm. And then the most recent one, everybody, the one, I forget what it's called, something about Jamie, the current show at the Amundsen. I was, up until very recently, I didn't want to go to those shows because I felt like I didn't feel safe, you know. But finally, I did some more research, and I realized if I just get better masks, you know, and just be very careful, hopefully that will be sufficient, because it's like I don't want to miss all of these things, you know. I want to be able to review them, but it is still, you know, it's still a question you have to kind of decide for yourself. Is this something you feel safe doing? And up until recently, I did not feel. I was okay with smaller houses. I was okay with going to the movies on a weekday when there's like 2 or 3 people in the theater and I'm masked, you know. But
anecdotal evidence from about a dozen artistic directors indicated that through Omicron, audience attendance was at about 30% of capacity, between 30 and 40% of capacity. So fingers crossed. Well, that'll change, but it'll change because it is actually objectively safer to be in public than it was for all the reasons you're talking about, masking and vaccinations.
I also think too that it might be safer to go see a big event in the theater than it may be, say, to go to a big concert or a sporting event or whatever, because I get the feeling that, first off, a lot of your traditional big theater audiences tend to be older people, and I think a lot of those people are very concerned, you know, for their health. And so, and the fact that they're checking, you know, you have to show proof of vaccination and your booster and whatever.
And photo ID, which is impressive.
Right.
To make sure that vaccination card actually belongs to you.
Yeah. So I feel like on some level, they're doing everything they can do. Yeah. You know, and so, I'm really hoping that things get better. But I do feel like right now I feel like the whole LA theater community has decided, okay, we're going to go for it. And I'm hoping that pays off for them. You know, I want them to succeed. Not, you know, I feel like I don't feel like I'm a booster for LA theater, that's not my job as a critic, but I want it to do well. You know, I want these people to get their stuff seen. I want there to be a thriving community. You know, I've just been doing this so long now that it's like, I'm on its side. You know, I want this thing to work. So I'm hoping that with everybody putting all of their energies together, that it will be a success.
Terry Morgan, thank you for joining us.
You're very welcome.
And next week, we are joined by up-and-coming playwright Morgan Smalley.
If you enjoy Animal Farm, please support us on Patreon.